There's a few books that every kid will read at some point between middle school and high school. Some may have been exposed to The Outsiders, a story about teen gang members dealing with the consequences of their violent actions. Others may have been given Lord of the Flies, where a group of school children are marooned on a desert island and struggle to survive. Animal Farm was a classroom staple, about a group of barnyard critters that revolt against their farmer and work to set up a new form of government. All deal with various mature themes, specifically death, gruesome ones at that. And while it is a very real experience that deserves to be touched upon, there's another piece of young adult gateway literature that handles this specific theme in a way totally unique unto itself. I'm speaking about the book Charlotte's Web, a story that's ingrained in the consciousness of American culture as much as the national anthem. It's a classic tale about life, and I don't merely mean the happenings and minutiae of everyday living, but life as a whole, the beginnings, the fear of the end, and the acceptance that comes with it. The story has been present for over 50 years now, and translated into a multitude of mediums, including stage musicals, a live-action film, and even a video game. But aside from the book, no interpretation may be more famous and fondly remembered than the 1973 animated film. Produced by Hanna-Barbera Productions, this movie holds a spot as a classic in animated history just as much as it does in the literary world. It's a warm film with memorable songs and a stellar voice cast that expresses all the emotions of life, and deservedly lives on as one of the best animated interpretations of a children's classic. It's a rare instance of a film living up to the lofty reputation of its source material. This is the humble movie, Charlotte's Web. Born in the almost unfathomable 1899, author E.B. White was a career writer, having penned various books, essays, and children's stories. Two of his most well-known classics being 1945's Stuart Little and 1970's Trumpet and the Swan. But in the time between those two stories was when he wrote his most famous work, Charlotte's Web. Following the life of a pig named Wilbur, who is at risk of being slaughtered by a farmer, a spider named Charlotte begins weaving complimentary words about Wilbur into her web, in an attempt to appease the farmer into sparing Wilbur's life. The book has since become a literary staple for young readers since its release, having found immortality on bookshelves worldwide, and being one of the best-selling children's stories of all time and, quote, often still outsells even Winnie the Pooh. But what of the animated film it spawned? How could it possibly live up to one of the great passageways of young adult reading? The movie certainly is a product of its time with cute characters and peppy songs, but stays surprisingly true to its source material, with the plot focusing entirely on Charlotte staving off Wilbur's impending death. It may seem to be a heady theme, and as you'll see, this movie has plenty of moments you wouldn't expect to make the final cut of a movie trying to appeal heavily to children, but that's part of what makes this movie an experience unto itself. The movie begins on an almost ominous tone, with the landscape art and color scheme resembling that of Watership Down. And if you're familiar with that movie, you'll know exactly what I mean. Jagged trees and darkened barns covering the mountains. The first instrumental song comes off as a bit spooky in its own right, sounding similar to the opening instrumental track from Nightmare Before Christmas. I'd recommend comparing the two yourself to hear the parallels, and because they're just terrific songs. After about a minute, we navigate through the creeping dawn onto a still sleeping town, passing over the various homes and buildings of the small city. that's when the music picks up, invoking a cheery, waking melody. We're greeted by the voice of the narrator, lent by Rex Allen, who was famous for starring in various westerns, performing as a professional singer, and narrating old Disney properties. And I mean extremely old ones, including A Country Coyote Goes Hollywood and The Hound Who Thought He Was a Raccoon. We settle in with his raspy, yet soothing voice, to him introducing us to springtime on the farm. It's that sort of talk that doesn't rhyme but still comes off as poetic, the beats being the observations of the beauty and harsh realities of life. We witness a litter of piglets and see a runt of a piglet struggling to find a place to feed. That's when we're introduced to our first human character, Farmer John. The initial impression of him isn't the most welcoming. We see him picking up an axe with the unfortunate task of dealing with the undersized piglet. John's young daughter Fern walks by and asks her mother why her father has an axe. And this is the point where we see how old the daughter is. Not in an explicit way where her age is outright stated, but in her reaction to being horrified by learning of her father's intentions. Fern frantically runs to stop her father, and he reacts by saying that she has to learn to control herself, but not in a condescending way. It's done where he wants her to compose herself, because while this may be her first experience with death in this capacity, he wants her to understand it's a part of life, and why it's not worth getting upset over such a natural occurrence. Fern, though, argues that he shouldn't be as blasé as he's making this situation out to be, since it's a matter of life and death. And honestly, they're both right. They're just looking at things through a different lens. Fern sees it as an absolute. Either this tiny pig lives, or his life is to be unjustly taken from him. Her father sees it as a bigger picture problem. The runt typically causes trouble on the farm, and his sacrifice is ultimately for the greater good of the livestock, and, in an indirect way, his own family. It's a micro versus macro argument, and both have valid points. Her father decides to take pity on the piglet and allows Fern to raise the pig herself, under the guise of teaching her a lesson. She immediately falls in love with the small creature and names him Wilbur. And I've got to say, Wilbur is designed to look completely adorable, like a living pink marshmallow. Fern begins to give Wilbur a bath and begins singing, and it's a sweet song, with a simple yet richly orchestrated background over a montage of the two spending time together. And it's almost more of a lullaby. And this is the point where I should mention that the music for this film was written by the Sherman Brothers, who are prolific in constructing musical scores for children's films, including Mary Poppins, The Jungle Book, and Snoopy Come Home. They do a wonderful job here with the songs. The first one, There's Something More, works as a lyrically stripped away verbal love letter to the life she has saved. It's sweet and extremely memorable, definitely one that highlights the relief and calming moment of their life. After a few weeks, we see Wilbur has grown into quite the pig, no longer recognizable as the runt, which leads to the unfortunate decision of the father to send him to his brother's farm. Fern runs out and picks up Wilbur, the two crying into each other's arms. There's no savior, no miracle this time. The next afternoon, Wilbur is crated and loaded into the back of a pickup truck, taken away with Fern running for the truck weeping. I can't remember if I've seen so much crying in the first 10 minutes of a kid's movie. But the tears don't feel exploitive. They come off as organic. This weeks-long roller coaster is happening in real time, and we get to see the unfortunate response to the natural progression of this event. Wilbur arrives at Fern's Uncle Homer Zuckerman's farm that evening, and hears a voice, belonging to a goose, that has a speech impediment that causes her to repeat words over and over. She asks Wilbur if he talks, to which he nods that he doesn't, but after some encouragement to make an effort to speak, he begins to formulate a voice. And honestly, it's kinda creepy. His oinks slowly transform into human speak, and you can see him turn into a sentient animal. Witnessing this metamorphosis made me think about regular animals in talking animals' worlds. Maybe the realization that you can exist as a conscious being is what can turn a normal, non-speaking creature into a character. It's something to ponder. Wilbur, now fully equipped with the ability to speak, in part thanks to the vocal work done by Henry Gibson, who had appeared in TV's Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and the film The Blues Brothers, decides to show off his new vocal range by singing, giving us the most verbose vocabulary in a song since Supercalifragilistic, before winding down to sleep. The next day we see the routine of life on the farm, but Wilbur doesn't eat, citing his sadness. Thinking Wilbur may be sick due to lack of appetite, the young farmhand spoon feeds him tonic to cure what he thinks is an upset stomach. And I like that Wilbur reacts like a real animal would, running away and trying to walk backwards when held in the owner's arms. For anyone who has ever had to give a pet medicine, you'll know exactly what Wilbur is going through. And after swallowing it, Wilbur faints. And as we'll see, this is far from the first time we'll be witnessing this occurrence. After awakening from his blackout, Wilbur looks for a playmate, asking an old ram if the young sheep can play. The ram denies the request due to their status on the farm, being highly regarded since they provide wool, and merely being a matter of time until Wilbur is plump enough to kill and eat, which understandably shocks Wilbur. In a reaction that's starting to become all too common, Wilbur faints yet again. And after being awoken with a bite to the tail by the farm rat named Templeton, voiced by Paul Lynde, who absolutely steals the movie with his skin-crawling performance and unforgettable cadence, Wilbur begins weeping, exclaiming how he doesn't want to die. We get our second look at the concept of death in this movie, and they differ greatly based on whose eyes and the situation that abounds. Our first lens was through Fern. She saw an innocent baby Wilbur with no idea of his impending doom. She cried over the possibility his life could be ended over what she deemed as an injustice. Our second point of view is from Wilbur, who had lived a blissful existence after being saved until the ram's reveal of the farmer's intentions towards him. And we get a physical separation as a representation of Wilbur's growth. When Wilbur arrives at the new farm, he's now physically grown up, and after learning of his inevitable fate, he views the world in a totally different light, spending all of his time constantly fretting about his own death. It makes you think, what is the true measure when you become an adult? Is it at a certain age when you legally are considered an adult? Or when you have major life responsibilities? This movie makes me consider possibly that it's when you realize the gravity and permanence of your own mortality. Wilbur's life totally changes from spending time with Fern and having fun, enjoying birthdays and running about the farm, to spending every waking moment of his life worried about how he can be killed at any second. Wilbur continues crying hysterically, screaming for his life, and full credit, it's a guttural cry. It's almost terrifying how desperate it sounds. But then he hears a voice who says it will be his friend, and to keep his chin up while it devises a way to try and save his life. The next morning, Wilbur wakes up to the same female voice singing for him to keep his chin up. And this is one of the more famous songs, and it's worth carving out a spot in your brain. The mysterious voice finally tells Wilbur to look up, and it's revealed that the voice belongs to a spider named Charlotte. And Charlotte possesses a warm voice. There's a maternal-sounding rhythm to it. Whether she's growing mildly frustrated or encouraging Wilbur, there's a kindness underlying every word. And as far as songs, she gets the majority of the heavy lifting, and rightfully so. Voiced by Debbie Reynolds, most famous for starring in Singing in the Rain, This movie is a perfect showcase for her singing voice to shine, being asked to give a reserved soulfulness, with each word feeling enunciated with purpose. There's a good chance that at the end of this film, it will be one of her songs that sticks with you. Fern comes to visit the farm, and the goose eggs hatch, save for one, with the goose allowing Templeton to take the dud egg. One of the goslings that does hatch, though, contains a small runt named Jeffrey who's scared of the big world. I love Jeffrey's voice. He's so innocent and his voice crackles, and when he squawks, it's my favorite sound of the movie. It's practically impossible to not fall in love with him. But Wilbur identifies with him having been a runt as well, and sings a song how they have lots in common. It's a wholesome song about how the two of them, and in a looser sense, all the animals are similar. And the dancing can kicking chickens are the poultry cherry on top. It harkens back to a novel time where songs weren't the focal points of these movies. Granted, they were big on selling films to curious families, but they felt more unique to their own films rather than following a now common blueprint. Little Jeffrey tells Wilbur he wants to be friends forever, but rather than humor him or say something charming, Wilbur makes it all about himself to this newborn, saying, "Jeffrey, there's a horrible fact of life that you don't know about yet," alluding to his impending doom. He does it in a way, though, that he wants Jeffrey to ask what he's talking about so he can explain his situation. Wilbur certainly likes being the center of attention, whether it's good or bad. He only seems to care as long as it's about him. Charlotte interrupts Wilbur's dramatics with Jeffrey, and rather than being coy with vague hints, she explains that Wilbur is going to die unless she comes up with a way to save his life. It's explained almost the same way Farmer John did to Fern. Very matter of fact about life. No sugarcoating it, it's just the way things are. We get the sense that Charlotte is wise through experiencing life. She's warm but also emotionally practical, wanting to save Wilbur from death, but not the world, hoping someday that he'll be okay with it, as all life has to learn to accept the end at some point. In a twist that will warm your heart, Michael Sims' book, The Story of Charlotte's Web, E.B. White's eccentric life in nature and the birth of an American classic, White writes a letter to a child, referencing the pivotal moment when the character of Charlotte was born. I didn't like spiders at first, but then I began watching one of them, and soon saw what a wonderful creature she was and what a skillful weaver. I named her Charlotte. It's a kind mental embrace to know that this generational character was born from a real place, even if it was in the rafters of the family farm. Just something about it makes the coming story hit a little closer too, knowing the personality he would give this character came from such an innocuous source. The next scene, we join Fern back at home talking with her father about the happenings with her visit with Wilbur. This is unintentionally funny, for me at least, and really gives off different feelings from when I was a kid to now. Fern recalls that one of the goose eggs was a dud, so the goose told Templeton he could take it. And the mom very correctly asks, "The goose did what? Who's Templeton?" And Fern continues, "He's a rat. None of us like him very much." "Who's us?" the mom rebuts. And Fern proceeds to tell her parents all about the talking animals, including Charlotte, leading the mom to say she shouldn't be hanging out there alone. And Fern replies that she isn't alone. She's with her best friends. As a kid, hey, I got it. I was right there with her. Come on, Mom, they're my friends. But as an adult, it's hilarious that she's talking about them like they're people. I imagine if she had gone any further with that conversation, it would have ended with the parents reacting the way Dorothy's family did in Return to Oz, sent to an asylum for some shock therapy. That evening, when everyone in the barn is asleep, Wilbur wakes up and asks Charlotte, are you thinking about a plan to save my life? I don't want to die. How are you going to save me? The fear of death has completely consumed his life. We get another song from Charlotte singing about the world sleeping, transitioning to a low-voiced male choir singing about the weaving of her web. It's hauntingly majestic, and the instrument work is truly beautiful. It's one of the highlights of the entire film, for how ethereal it is, and the song culminates with Charlotte's Web reading, "Some pig." The next day, the farmhand frantically calls out for Homer and his wife about the incredible message in the web. The wife comments on how wonderful the spider is, but Homer believes it's Wilbur that's special. The wife tries to convince him it's not an ordinary spider, but the farmer says, no, it's a normal spider, it's a special pig though, which is hilarious, determining the pig is special by what's written in the ordinary spider's web. Gotcha. This leads people to coming from far and wide to see Wilbur and his endorsement in the web, but Wilbur feels that the problem still isn't solved, and worries that people will forget that he's special. So the animals brainstorm another word to weave. They eventually settle on terrific, and again, Charlotte weaves the word, and again, the crowds react in the previous fashion, coming to see Wilbur once more. But when the crowds die down once again, the farmers comment that they'll get some good ham and bacon out of Wilbur when it's finally time to kill him. Wilbur faints again, and it's starting to seem that he's unconscious just as much as he is conscious in this movie. But in response, Charlotte calls upon Templeton to find words she can put in her web. Templeton finds a soap package and rips off the tab that has the word radiant printed on it. The next morning, Charlotte reveals the word in her web, causing the throngs of people to return to marvel at Wilbur, now playing up the description by dancing and flipping and prancing, which leads the farmer to announce that he'll be entering Wilbur in the fair. Wilbur asks Charlotte to come to the fair with him, and she lets him know that it's time for her to lay her eggs, commenting how there's so much to do in so little time, before going into a song, and it's another beauty, with a harp being strummed as Charlotte sings, "How very special are we, to have on our family tree Mother Earth and Father Time." If I'm beginning to sound redundant about how each song is a must-listen, I'm okay with that. Where the Sherman Brothers' Disney works are their most well-known, this soundtrack may be some of their most thoughtful music. The next day, Wilbur moans and cries until Charlotte agrees to accompany him to the fair. Charlotte asks for Templeton to go with them in case they need errands run, but he denies her request, until the goose sings a hilarious song about the veritable smorgasbord of garbage there will be for him to eat there. And Templeton asks if there will even be tin cans with particles of tuna sticking to them, and greasy paper bags stuffed with rotten eggs. And seeing Templeton and the goose dance with each other may just be the comedic highlight of this film. The three end up at the fair, and Fern spends time with Wilbur in his stable, until an old male friend begins to take her attention from Wilbur, and the two walk off with Wilbur watching from behind the fence. This leads Wilbur to begin crying, trying to elicit pity from Charlotte, asking how she likes what he just saw, and she sharply replies, "I like it just fine." It's funny how quickly it darts from her mouth, but she's got bigger fish to fry. She makes a surprising statement to let Wilbur know it will be her last time writing, and heads off for a nap. The foreshadowing is becoming stronger for the audience, but Wilbur still has no idea what's going on. That night, Templeton gets the next word on a shred of paper that reads, "humble." And in reward for his efforts, he goes on a tirade of gluttony, eating all the melon rings and cotton candy he can get his paws on, making a sandwich of thrown-out food that would make Scooby-Doo blush. All while singing the veritable smorgasbord song to himself again, in a glee we haven't seen from him yet. The next day, Wilbur wakes up to see that Charlotte has created her greatest work. Not more web weaving, but her egg sac, containing 514 of her eggs. Wilbur is elated, but to me, it just makes my skin crawl. Charlotte admits she's languishing, and it starts becoming painfully obvious that she's slowing down. The crowds do get to see the one last amazing word written above Wilbur's stall, but the pig next to him has already won first prize, causing the family to worry that his life won't be spared after all. That is, until a marching band sweeps Wilbur and Homer onto the main stage, where a barbershop quartet belts out a song that will make your feet bleed from excessive toe tapping, and it contains every word that's been weaved into the web. He's some terrific, radiant, humble thingamajig of a pig. And to close out the festivities, Wilbur is awarded a third-place medal, and Homer declares that Wilbur will live to a ripe old age. It's a satisfying payoff, with all of Charlotte's hard work to keep him alive, finally resulting in his life being saved. Now this movie could have ended there, and that would have been a perfectly fine rosy finish. But it wouldn't be the classic that it is if the story didn't continue. Charlotte congratulates Wilbur on his victory and states that she is at peace, knowing he will live on. When he asks her why she went through all the trouble, she says that perhaps it was to lift her own life up in some sort of way. And in possibly the most mature and emotional interaction between the two comes in the form of the response from Wilbur. He tells her that she saved him, and he would gladly give his life for her. It's an intense and powerful moment. Wilbur, who has spent his entire life fretting over being killed, would willingly give himself up to save his friend? It's a small fraction of a second that we see the maturity and growth and selflessness that he has gained through their friendship, and it's a testament to the positive influence Charlotte has imprinted onto him. It's short-lived, however, as Charlotte reveals that she's going to die. Wilbur tells Templeton to grab her egg sac to take back home, and as Charlotte grows weaker, she sings as Wilbur's life plays before her eyes, before she gets up and makes a final descent into the darkness. Wilbur calls out to Charlotte twice, but the third time is when the realization hits. She's gone. Wilbur sits alone and cries, but it's different from his previous tears. Where before his bouts of crying seemed almost selfish, these are the first ones that come across as genuinely meaningful. It hurts to see Wilbur cry and Fern wipe his tears. He looks like a sad animal. Not a sad cartoon animal, a sad animal. He returns to the barn with Templeton and the egg sac, and springtime rolls around again and new life is brought into the world. We see the new litters of the farm, young sheep, Templeton's kids, and Charlotte's eggs finally hatching, as they march in a line and use their webs to fly off. They all leave, prompting Wilbur to try and run away, until he hears 3 of Charlotte's children. He convinces them to stay on the farm, and says when they get older, for them to write in their webs, "This hallowed doorway was once the home of Charlotte. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. Her memory will be treasured forever." A bit of an ask, but the sentiment is there. The film peters out with Wilbur taking care of Charlotte's descendants, still missing his long-gone friend, but no longer sorrowful or in fear for his life. Like the famous pig himself, the animated Charlotte's Web continues to live on, revered and secure in its position in the annals of history. Unfortunately, E.B. White did not feel the same way about the cartoon version of his masterpiece, stating, "The Hanna-Barbera version has never pleased either of us. The story is interrupted every few minutes so that somebody can sing a jolly song. I don't care much for jolly songs. The Blue Hill Fair, which I tried to report faithfully in the book, has become a Disney World with 76 trombones. But that's what you get for getting embroiled in Hollywood." As the creator, I respect White's perspective. He is more than entitled to be dissatisfied with the result. But just as the overwhelming majority of people find Stanley Kubrick's film version of Stephen King's The Shining a masterpiece that rivals the original work, so too do audiences consider this a more than worthy beloved interpretation. The movie is a perfect watch for anyone who has ever enjoyed the book or has a soft spot for more mellow, character-driven tales. It's a wonderful entry for young viewers looking to take that first step into adulthood, while still maintaining enough buoyancy through the songs and cute characters. And by the time the credits roll, they'll always remember the terrific, radiant, humble movie, Charlotte's Web.